That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Alright guys, y'all know I pretty much get every single video from the people on Patreon. They're the ones who support the show. They're the ones who I do the show for. But I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go out of my way for this one. I'm going to have to talk about something that I really didn't plan on talking about. I didn't even plan on having this stance this offseason. I thought I was just kind of neutral on Henry Ruggs. But y'all know I participate in a ton of Dynasty leagues and I draft all over the board. I love to trade around in my rookie drafts because I think the best way you can get an advantage in Dynasty in terms of the rookie draft is if you play in a lot of leagues, you really have a good feel of how the draft is going to go for your specific format. And before the draft starts, you're actually able to go out there, especially in these startup drafts that we're doing for the Flock leagues. I'm going out there and very carefully selecting exactly where I would like to pick in the rookie draft. So I'm going there. I'm trying to get these early second round picks just because I see Henry Ruggs falling here every single draft. And it just baffles me at this point just because there are so many other players going before Henry Ruggs that have the profile that doesn't even compare. And it really is just a misunderstanding of the Dynasty community. I know there are a couple podcasters that go on there and say, hey, Henry Ruggs doesn't have the production and he doesn't fit into my model, so I don't want to draft him on my fantasy team. But guys, I'm sorry to break the news. Some guys aren't going to fit into the model because every wide receiver is different and every situation is different. And we have to realize that with Henry Ruggs, we have to look at the NFL's evaluation of him and put that into our Dynasty evaluation. And we can't just listen to these guys who spent 20 minutes on Excel creating a little spreadsheet with their college market shares and their breakout ages and really expecting that to one-for-one transfer for fantasy production. I know a lot of people don't necessarily understand how those models work, but in my opinion, they are using those models not necessarily to get an advantage on what we could see from NFL draft position, but it's a causation and correlation trap where they're really just identifying the players who project to have volume and not necessarily project to help their NFL teams. But that's what we want. We want the guys that are going to project to help our fantasy teams. So those models help to a certain extent. They are useful. They do have correlations, but we have to understand that they're not going to work with every prospect profile just because some guys are extremely different. And we have to keep that in mind. And that is what we have here with Henry Ruggs. So let's get into it. Henry Ruggs is 5'11", 188 pounds. And he has 91st percentile hand size. And this is something that we have to really put a good amount of weight into because we see constantly these guys that come in and they're burners. They're the fastest guy at the NFL Combine. What's hilarious, if you look at just the correlation between these 40 times and hand sizes, are we see these guys like Will Fuller, T.Y. Hilton, Brandon Cooks. Look them all up. Look up their hand sizes. They're all in like the 15th percentile or lower, which is going into the narrative that these speedster wide receivers consistently drop balls. But we look at Henry Ruggs, and he was not really dropping balls at all in his time at Alabama. And we understand this now that he has a 91st percentile hand size, which it doesn't sound weird, but that is extremely, extremely rare to find with a wide receiver that can run as fast as Henry Ruggs, as weird as that sounds. But Henry Ruggs was drafted with the 12th overall pick in the NFL draft. He was the first wide receiver off the board, and this is where my evaluation really needs to, I don't feel like I have to say anything after this. We see Henry Ruggs, the first wide receiver off the board, and we know this is the case just because of his speed. He was pretty much a 100 percentile athlete in every single testing measurable he performed in, and this is all you really have to know about the Henry Ruggs profile. He's a guy that is definitely going to be better for the NFL than our fantasy teams just because he's going to make the Las Vegas Raiders significantly better with what he can do to the defense, how he's going to take the attention for the safeties because they can't let him go over the top or they're going to be giving up consistently long touchdowns, and that's not something you can afford to do as a defense. But nonetheless, even though he's going to help NFL teams more than our fantasy teams, and I am extremely confident in that take, it does not necessarily matter when, yes, he may be the most valuable NFL wide receiver in this draft, but he's being valued as if he's like the 6th fantasy wide receiver in this draft. It's just absurd. I'm seeing him go behind Denzel Mims and T. Higgins in some drafts. And these aren't just mock drafts that you're finding on some bum Dynasty website where they're just having fake drafts with fake Dynasty players in there. No, these are real drafts. I mean, the league that I saw, Denzel Mims and T. Higgins go ahead of him, I believe that was like a $125 buy-in league. I mean, these are real guys going out there and ranking Henry Ruggs as their 6th or 7th Dynasty wide receiver, and that just does not make sense. And let's get into what Henry Ruggs really has done up until this point in his entire career. And I know I don't really do this much with these wide receivers. I think it's actually important to look at the running backs in high school, just because the running backs, it's so instinctual, and really you understand with their athleticism what they're able to do from a young age. But at the wide receiver position, it doesn't really matter too much what they did in high school generally, just because it's so technical and you have to learn and develop so much at the college level that really by the time you're at the NFL, it does not matter what was on your resume in high school. But I think it's important to look at Henry Ruggs just because he did not necessarily get the opportunity at Alabama. We know he was playing with other stud wide receivers, so this is going to be the one case. I may just be biased here. Keep this in mind. This may just be trash stats that I'm putting in front of you, but I believe it's important to look at. So in 9 games, Henry Ruggs' senior year of high school, he had 38 catches, so nothing impressive, 639 yards. That stands out a little bit considering how low his catch mark was. But what's insane is he had 20 total touchdowns. Keep in mind, he is going to get some of these touchdowns from like kick returns and punt returns, but that just shows what an athlete Henry Ruggs is. On 38 receptions, the man scored 20 touchdowns. So he's scoring a touchdown more often than he's catching 2 balls. That's just ridiculous from the Henry Ruggs standpoint. And that's all you really have to understand about the Henry Ruggs profile, because we go to his freshman season at Alabama. How many receptions did he have? 12. How many total touchdowns? 6. So literally every other reception is a touchdown for Henry Ruggs. The guy is a playmaker. The guy's electric, and he can really just swing games with a single play. And we do not see this very often in Dynasty, and we don't see this at the NFL level either. His sophomore year, he actually bumped up his volume a little bit. He had 3.2 receptions a game. Y'all know I love to look at per game statistics. And y'all know I'm also the guy that says touchdowns are mainly fluky, but with Henry Ruggs and his profile, we can't ignore them. Just like we can't ignore Devontae Adams racking up touchdowns every season, I think it's hard to ignore really because of the type of wide receiver Henry Ruggs is, this touchdown mark year over year. So his sophomore year, he actually put up 11 touchdowns. His junior year, he increased his receptions per game to 3.3. And he really saw a slight drop in his touchdowns to 8 touchdowns a game. But you have to understand he also played 2 less games his junior season. And the reason that Henry Ruggs does not fit into the spreadsheets of so many Dynasty analysts that are just literally like managers of grocery stores or teachers, I mean, making spreadsheets thinking that they're able to accurately predict these players better than the NFL is, I mean, it's just kind of funny at this point. But the reason he does not fit those spreadsheets for those people is Alabama had Jerry Jeudy, Devontae Smith, Henry Ruggs, and Jalen Waddle all on the same team on the same season. So how is Henry Ruggs really going to be able to separate himself from the rest? I mean, we saw Jerry Jeudy. He didn't have the production that a CeeDee Lamb did, but it was consensus that Jerry Jeudy was one of the top Dynasty wide receivers and top wide receivers for the NFL draft. And really, the NFL community felt that same way about Henry Ruggs. But for some reason, the Dynasty community has that disconnect. This is exactly like what we saw in Superflex leagues with Josh Allen when he came out of college and with Daniel Jones last season. And I think that's why they were my highest owned players in both of those rookie drafts, just because if a guy is so much higher valued in the NFL level than he is in Dynasty, I mean, I'm going to side with the NFL ownership and the NFL teams every single time over whatever your favorite Dynasty analyst who works a 9-to-5 job doing God knows what. I mean, it's kind of silly that we can get in these circles and we can try to tell ourselves a story, and so many people say it over and over again, and we can convince ourselves that we are smarter than these guys that are actually going out there doing this as their job. And in some cases, I think that there is a case to be made. Like, there's obviously some very poorly managed teams, but at the same time, if we see the entire draft day media going around talking about Henry Ruggs in the top tier of wide receivers in this draft class, I don't think we can really make the separation in Dynasty. I think he has to be there as well in Dynasty. By no means am I saying that Henry Ruggs should be valued ahead of a CeeDee Lamb, ahead of a Jerry Jeudy. But at the same time, I sent out a tweet today. Just because it baffled me, I got Henry Ruggs again in a rookie draft. I am consistently selecting him at the 2.03 or later in these Superflex rookie drafts, which are all real drafts, not trash mock drafts. And if you're going to be able to get the first NFL wide receiver off the board in the early second round behind a guy like Keyshawn Vaughn, who I'll be talking about in my next video, that's something that you're going to do, and you are just going to print money on that bet that you're making, because essentially every time you draft someone, you're making a bet in Dynasty. And now let's talk about the situation he finds himself in 2020 and why I'm so bullish on Henry Ruggs. So if we look at the Raiders wide receiver room right now, we have Tyrell Williams, Hunter Renfrow, Brian Edwards, Nelson Aguilar, and Lynn Bowden. And who knows if Lynn Bowden's actually a wide receiver. Nelson Aguilar obviously has proven to be a subpar talent in the league. Hunter Renfrow, like, are you kidding me right now? Have you seen a video of Henry Ruggs dunking? And then have you seen a picture of Hunter Renfrow? I'm not even going to entertain the argument. And then we have Brian Edwards, who I know a lot of people are excited about Brian Edwards, but you have to understand that out South Carolina, most of his production came off of screens. So he's going to be operating in a completely different part of the football field that Henry Ruggs is. So Henry Ruggs is looking like he's going to be the prototypical alpha wide receiver on this Oakland Raiders team. And I think if we can give him a conservative 17% target share in 2019 for this Las Vegas Raiders team, just due to really, I think Henry Ruggs is going to be one of these wide receivers that can get on the field very early his rookie year, because we know that something that NFL teams can't teach and something that's so valuable is that speed. So I think he's the safest wide receiver to have a role on his team day one. We see that John Gruden is not too scared to put out rookies. He was all aboard getting Josh Jacobs on the field right away last year. We see another Alabama coming in, his first round pick. And I think it's going to be a similar story. He's going to get out there early. He's going to be out there week one getting targets. And if we give him 17% of the Oakland Raiders targets in 2019, that'd be 89 targets. Say he gets 55 receptions, would be about a 61% catch rate, which is really far down to what Derek Carr usually does. Derek Carr's usually around the 70 percentile in completion rate, but I'm going to be a little bit bearish here just because we know that Henry Ruggs is going to be operating in a part of the football field where the catch rate is generally lower. And let's look at his yards per reception, which has been historically high his entire career, dating back to high school, all 3 seasons in Alabama. And let's just take his junior season at Alabama, which was actually his lowest yards per reception mark, and let's just take 90% of that, and he would be looking at 16.83 yards per reception. That's good for 925 yards his rookie season. And let's call him having 8 touchdowns just because he's a guy that's like a Devontae Adams. He's an outlier. He's going to be scoring touchdowns. So if he hits these marks, this is going to be him putting up 12.18 points per game. And the only rookies that finished at this point or higher last season were A.J. Brown and Terry McLaurin. So A.J. Brown, obviously a stud. A.J. Brown is a way better dynasty asset than Henry Ruggs by every measure of the word. But we look at Terry McLaurin. What is different between Terry McLaurin and Henry Ruggs? Henry Ruggs is a significantly younger player coming into the league. He's significantly more athletic, and he plays the same kind of role that Terry McLaurin does. You can argue that Terry McLaurin's a little bit better of a route runner, but at the same time, if I'm having to make this bet, I think I'm betting on Henry Ruggs having a more successful NFL career than Terry McLaurin, as crazy as that sounds. And I guarantee you, you go out there, you offer Terry McLaurin for Henry Ruggs plus right now, you could get a pretty penny on top of Ruggs. But thanks, guys. Go out there. Go draft Henry Ruggs. Go trade for Henry Ruggs. Really hope y'all do it, and really hope it pays off. Have a good day.